Hello, my name is Jenny, and I'm 32. I used to be a tech entrepreneur torn between Boston and Colorado, living in perpetual motion, where my calendar was denser than a concrete wall and coffee replaced sleep. I thought I had planned for everything: business plans, investors, future risks, even potential failures. Everything except for one thing: the past, which, as it turned out, doesn't disappear just by moving far away. I was sitting in my office when my phone vibrated in early November. A message from Mom. Innocent, short, but for some reason, it made me freeze. "Hi, Jenny. Your father and I decided to have a quiet Thanksgiving this year. It will just be Madison, Jason, and the kids. I hope you understand. Love you." I just stared at the screen for a full minute, not blinking. Then I slowly typed, "Have a good time," and put the phone down. That was it. No emotion, no reproach. What was the point of arguing? It's not news. My whole life is like a shadow on the wall, always nearby but never in the spotlight. For as long as I can remember, everything revolved around Madison. The older sister, the golden child, the prom queen, the cheerleading captain, the straight-A student, the beauty, the parents' favorite. Even her footsteps sounded louder than applause. I was quieter, always quieter. I remember when I was 12, I came home from the science fair holding a blue ribbon, second place. My project was about computer algorithms. I had been writing code at night while my parents slept, sure that they were proud of me, just not showing it. I walked into the kitchen beaming, as if I had brought home a Nobel Prize. Mom was on the phone, chatting with one of her friends. "That's nice, dear," she said absently, without even looking at the ribbon. "By the way, did you see how Madison played for the school team today? The coach said she's the best in years." Dad lit up like a high-voltage lamp. "We need to call everyone. This is amazing." I stood there clutching the ribbon in my hand. Then I went to my room and pinned it to the bulletin board, a small strip of fabric against the flowered wallpaper, my one triumph that nobody remembered. Years passed. I turned 15 and spent 3 nights in a row without sleep, learning Python from old online forums. The internet was slow back then, but I didn't give up. I created a program that sorted family photos by date and location. It seemed like now they would finally see that I wasn't just always on the laptop. I showed it to my father. He looked at the screen for about 5 seconds. "That's good, Jenny." And then, without looking up, he added, "Did you know Madison got into the Senior Honor Society? We need to buy her a dress this weekend." My moment dissolved like smoke. And then, MIT, my dream. I got a partial scholarship, and when I told them about it at dinner, my hands were shaking. Mom nodded. "That's far from home." Dad muttered, "Well, if that's what you want, then fine." No celebration, no congratulations, not even a simple "well done." Just the clinking of forks and a muffled "cool" from Madison, who didn't look up from her phone. College was lonely. In Cambridge, autumn smelled of rain and coffee, and I spent my evenings in the library filling the void with textbooks and projects. My parents called rarely, once a month if I was lucky, and even then the conversations quickly turned to Madison, her career, her house, her life. In my sophomore year, she married Jason. The wedding was like something from a glossy magazine: a huge hall, purple ribbons, an orchestra, 8 bridesmaids in identical dresses. I wasn't one of them. She chose her sorority sisters, school friends, even Jason's sister, just not me. At the reception, I ended up in the kitchen, helping the waiters pass out glasses of champagne. No one called for me, no one asked. Through the glass doors, I saw Madison and her friends dancing in sync, how Mom was beaming, how Dad proudly raised his glass, talking about his perfect daughter. I stood in the shadow of a lamp amid the smell of champagne and wet napkins and thought that this was probably my role, to be the background for their celebration. No one noticed I was missing from my table. After that, family holidays became a kind of tradition, but not the warm kind. Every Thanksgiving or Christmas, I would come to my parents' house, bringing a bottle of wine and a pre-prepared smile, polite, neutral, without excessive shine. Within an hour of dinner, I'd be at the sink, scrubbing piles of dishes, listening to the distant laughter from the living room. There, among the soft sofas and the smell of cinnamon, sat Madison, with Jason and their kids, just as loud and confident as she was. My parents fussed over the grandchildren on the floor, completely absorbed in their happiness as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. I watched them through the doorway and felt the invisible wall built between us long ago, only thickening with the years. Throughout my entire time at MIT, they never visited. Not one campus tour, not one coffee at a local cafe, not even that proud look I so wanted to see. But they did go on vacation with Madison and Jason twice. First to Florida, then to California. My Facebook feed was endless pictures. The beach, the sun, Madison in a white Panama hat, Dad with an ice cream, Mom with a caption, "Finally, a well-deserved break." Everyone smiling. When I graduated from MIT in the top 15% of my class, they did come to the ceremony. I saw them in the crowd and thought, maybe now. But after I got my diploma, Dad glanced at his watch. One of Madison's kids had a birthday, and they were in a hurry to get back. We didn't even go for dinner. I remained standing on the campus steps, holding the diploma folder like a shield against the emptiness. After university, I worked for several Boston tech companies. The work was stable, but I felt an itch inside, like a stranger in someone else's rhythm. I wanted more, something of my own, built from scratch. So when I turned 26, I took a risk and founded my first startup. I was burning with the idea, sleeping 3 hours a night, living on coffee and optimism. 18 months later, the project collapsed. I was left with debts, empty bank accounts, and a head full of failed presentations. I called my parents. I didn't want money, though it wouldn't have hurt, but just the words, "We believe in you." Dad listened silently, then sighed heavily. "Jenny, I don't want to hurt you, but apparently business isn't for everyone. You're just not cut out for it. Maybe try to find a normal job, with a stable salary, benefits, without these adventures." Then Mom's voice came on the line, warm but sharp. "Your father is right, dear. Look at Madison. She's so practical, so successful in her investment firm. Ask her for advice on how to settle down properly in life." I thanked them, said I had to go, and hung up. No anger, no resentment, just a deafening silence. I just sat in my tiny apartment staring at a blank wall. The apartment, if you could even call it that, was a room with a futon, a desk made from an old door, and 2 filing cabinets for legs. 3 roommates, constant noise, worn-out linoleum, and the smell of instant noodles. But it was my space, my tiny island in an ocean of others' achievements. Over time, I got a job at Digital Innovations. I worked like a maniac and soon got noticed. I was promoted to team lead, then to director of product development. For the first time in my life, I started earning real money, not just to get by, but enough to not worry about every dollar. But even then, with a new laptop on my desk and a salary that came on time, I felt a strange emptiness. Everything felt alien. I still wanted to create something of my own, not for a report, not for the bosses, but for the sake of meaning itself. So when I turned 29, I left again. It seemed insane to jump into the same river where I had once drowned, but I couldn't do otherwise. That's how my second startup was born, Cyber Shield, a company developing cybersecurity software. My friends thought I was crazy. My roommates decided I'd finally lost it. The first few months were brutal. I moved to an even smaller apartment, lived on noodles and cheap coffee, spent 16 hours a day at my laptop. Sometimes I fell asleep right on the keyboard and woke up with key marks on my face. There were nights I stared at the ceiling and thought my parents were probably right, that I just wasn't meant for success. After 3 months, the money was almost gone. I picked up the phone, held it in my hands for a long time, then decided. I dialed my father's number. "Dad, I need help," I said, feeling my voice tremble. "A small loan just to keep the company afloat for a few more months. I'll pay it back, with interest." He sighed into the phone, heavily, like a man who isn't surprised but is just confirming his own suspicions. "Jenny, I warned you," he said evenly, without reproach, but without a trace of sympathy either. "Business isn't for you. Cut your losses. Find a normal job, a real one." Then his voice changed, as if a different person had come on the line. Softer, warmer, with that shade of pride I'd heard all my life, but never directed at me. By the way, Madison just got promoted to senior analyst. Can you imagine? She's doing great. Without all your dramas and begging. A smart, stable job, that's how it's done. I didn't respond. I just pressed the end call button. I didn't have the strength to listen anymore. Right then, in that minute, I promised myself I would never ask them for anything again. Not money, not advice, not involvement. But here's the strange thing. Sometimes life takes an unexpected turn. Sometimes everything works out not because you're helped, but because you simply don't give up. Sometimes luck really does come, not loudly, but quietly, like morning light filtering through the blinds. CyberShield suddenly started to grow. Slowly at first, a couple of new clients, then partnership contracts, and soon we had our first major customer. I didn't tell anyone. Not out of modesty, more out of stubbornness. I still went to family holidays, sat at the same long oak table, listened to the same conversations about Madison's kids and her trips. I let everyone think I was still floundering somewhere at the bottom. "How's your work, dear?" Mom would ask between sips of wine, not even looking at me. "Still tinkering with that little computer?" she'd add, already turning away to wipe chocolate off a grandchild's face. "It's fine," I'd reply calmly without resentment. Madison would lean over, smiling her flawless smile, and gently pat my hand. "It's great that you're still trying. Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur, right? There's no shame in that." I'd smile back and change the subject. They never guessed that in 3 years, my little computer had become a company with a staff of 100 in offices in Boston, Denver, and Austin. That our products protected entire corporations and government agencies from cyber attacks. That tens of thousands of companies worldwide relied on CyberShield without even knowing that at the head of this system was the same girl nobody noticed by the kitchen sink. And then everything happened quickly. I turned 31 when representatives from a major tech conglomerate approached me. They wanted to buy the company. At first, I thought it was a prank. The offer sounded too big. But then came the meetings, negotiations, discussions, reports, presentations, months of business suits, glass conference rooms, and coffee in plastic cups. For 4 months, lawyers and consultants tossed around terms like asset valuation, market share, growth potential. And one day, it was over. The contract was signed. CyberShield was bought for $320 million. When I signed my name and put the pen down, it seemed too quiet around me. I didn't feel ecstasy or triumph, just an emptiness, like the ringing in your ears after loud music. I walked out of the conference room, got to my car, drove to my apartment, and just sat on the sofa. Then, unable to hold back, I laughed. The laughter turned into tears, long, loud, liberating. The next day, I bought a penthouse in Boston. Not for luxury, but just to finally have a space where I could breathe. Large windows, a view of the harbor, morning light reflecting off the glass. Simplicity and quiet. Nothing extra. Then I started looking at houses in Colorado. I'd always loved those places. The air smelling of pine, the blue of the mountains, the snow on the peaks. There was always a feeling of freedom there that no city or office could give. I found an estate about an hour's drive from Denver. 6 bedrooms, a guest house, 50 acres of land, and a view that took your breath away. The price? $6 million. I bought it without a second thought. Another $1 million went into renovations. I wanted it to look exactly as I had once imagined. Light wood, stone, glass, space, and mountains in every window. I hired a designer, a landscape architect, contractors. Everything went according to plan, clearly and thoughtfully. To manage the estate, I hired Michael, a calm, reliable man with an impeccable reputation. He oversaw the construction, handled the bills, took care of the little things I didn't want to think about. By October, everything was ready. The house stood on a hill, as if carved from the landscape itself, stone, wood, and glass in perfect balance. In the morning, the sun slowly descended down the mountains, flooding the terrace with golden light. In the evening, pink skies and the smell of pines. It was exactly as I had dreamed. The guest house had 3 bedrooms, each with its own view. One faced the forest, another the stream, the third the sunset. The main house was filled with silence and the smell of fresh wood. The kitchen, designed for a chef, was spacious, with a marble countertop, shiny copper cookware, and huge windows through which stripes of golden light fell on the floor. Along one wall was a library, floor-to-ceiling shelves, half still empty, as if waiting to be filled. A home theater, a gym, everything perfectly new, as if built not by hands but by the dream itself. I walked through these rooms and listened to my footsteps echoing off the walls. The space felt alive, but it lacked voices, the clinking of dishes, the murmur of conversation. Thanksgiving was approaching. I found myself thinking more and more about inviting everyone for the first time in years, my parents, my sister, relatives, to show them what I had built, how I lived, how everything was now. Not to boast, though perhaps there was a bit of truth in that too, but to finally share this success with them, to make it shared. I imagined my parents' faces when they entered the house, when they saw the stone walls, the panoramic windows, the lights reflected in the glass. Maybe then they would look at me differently. Maybe for the first time, they would be proud. Maybe everything would change. But then my mom's short message surfaced in my memory. This year, we decided to celebrate modestly, just Madison, Jason, and the kids. A simple phrase, tossed off casually, and yet, like a wall. I sat on the porch of my new house, looking at the mountains drowning in blue, and suddenly felt something shift inside. Not anger, not pain, just weariness from the endless waiting for recognition that would never come. I realized I was done. Then I started making calls, first to Uncle James. "Hi, are you getting ready for Thanksgiving?" I asked. He chuckled into the phone. "No plans. Your parents said they wanted a quiet celebration this year. Just immediate family, I guess." "Immediate family," I repeated, feeling the corners of my lips lift in an almost invisible smile. "I see. Well, listen, would you like to come to Colorado? I just bought a house." "Colorado?" He perked up. "Of course, sounds tempting." Next, I called Aunt Linda. Her answer was almost the same. My parents had decided to celebrate quietly, a small circle. Then I started calling everyone. Cousins, second cousins, old family friends, those who had always been at our long table in childhood. All those who once made up our noisy, lively family holiday. And everyone said the same thing. They weren't invited. My parents had decided on a modest gathering, only the closest. I called 23 people, 23 rejections, not because they didn't want to come, but because they had simply been crossed off. On the 24th call, Aunt Carol answered. Her voice was dry but honest, without embellishment. "Jenny, your parents didn't want us there. They said Jason's family are doctors, lawyers, important people. Your mom said she wanted to make an impression. We, apparently, don't fit in." I listened silently, feeling an old, dull pain settle inside with each of her words. "Can you believe it?" Carol added. "We're not good enough anymore." "I can," I said calmly. "Thanks for telling me." I turned off my phone and sat in silence for another minute, looking at the mountains veiled in the evening light. Then I took a notepad and started writing down names. I invited everyone. Uncle James and Aunt Linda, Aunt Carol and her husband, all the cousins, second cousins, family friends. I invited former employees from Cyber Shield, those who had been there when I stayed up nights. I invited my 2 best friends from MIT, those who had seen my tears and my coffee for breakfast. Almost everyone said yes. The list grew like a snowball until it reached 35 people. I didn't want anyone to worry about money. I bought everyone first-class tickets to Denver, organized transfers from the airport to the estate, buses, limousines, everything thought out. For those who didn't fit in the main house and guest house, I booked rooms at a nice hotel nearby with a view of a mountain lake. The holiday was meant to be not just a dinner, but the start of a new tradition. My tradition. I hired a chef, Marco, an Italian with refined manners who had previously worked at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Denver. He created a menu worthy of a gastronomy magazine. Turkey stuffed with herbs and oranges, roasted vegetables, homemade pies, desserts, wine from local vineyards. I ordered enough food for 50 people. I hired a professional photographer to capture everything: the smiles, the dinner, the landscapes, the evening lights of Colorado. Then I went through all the rooms, in the house and the guest house. On every bed, I placed personal gifts. For Uncle James, a new fly fishing rod with an engraving. For Aunt Linda, an Art Deco bracelet, rare, from a private collection. For my cousin's kids, books with bright illustrations, handmade wooden toys. Each item was chosen with love, with attention to detail. I worked with Michael for 2 weeks, planning every detail of the upcoming holiday, as if the fate of the whole world depended on it. We checked the lighting, arranged the furniture, bought dishes and tablecloths, chose flowers that would complement the warm hue of the walls. The house shone, as if it had woken up and was waiting for guests, finally ready to come alive. In every room there were fresh bouquets, white lilies, orange dahlias, eucalyptus. The air was filled with the scent of wood and the light freshness of pine branches we placed in vases by the staircase. The kitchen was overflowing with abundance. Shelves groaned with supplies, refrigerators hummed, packed with everything Marco needed. On the table lay the menu: herb and orange roasted turkey, chestnut soup, caramel apple pies, pistachio and pomegranate dessert. The guest rooms sparkled with cleanliness: new linens, neatly folded towels, pillows that still held the scent of factory lavender. Everything was ready. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I was in the kitchen, going over the menu with Marco. He was explaining the nuances of the sauce, which should be thick but not too heavy, when my phone rang. On the screen, a name I hardly expected to see: Madison. I hesitated for a second, then answered. "Hi, Jenny," she said in her even, slightly strained voice. "Just wanted to see how you're doing." "Everything's fine," I replied calmly. "What are you doing for Thanksgiving?" A shadow of curiosity crept into her voice. "I have plans." "Oh, with friends?" "With family," I said. A pause hung between us. "What family?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just pressed the end call button, put the phone face down, and switched it to silent mode. The air became dense and quiet again. I turned back to Marco, smiled, and said, "Let's continue. We're going to have the best Thanksgiving anyone has ever seen." The holiday morning started early. I woke up at 6 as the sun was just beginning to tinge the mountain peaks with gold. The house was flooded with soft light, and the silence resembled the breath of something large and alive. Marco was already in the kitchen. The smell of frying sage and fresh bread wafted everywhere. At 7, the photographer arrived, camera around his neck and a warm smile. He started shooting immediately. The house, the sunrise, the smoke from the fireplace. Everything looked perfect. The first guest was Uncle Stephen with his wife, Karen. Their car stopped at the gate exactly at 9. They got out and stood still as if seeing a mirage. "Wow, Jenny," Stephen said, slowly taking off his hat. "Is all this yours?" I smiled and hugged them both. "All mine." Karen shook her head, her eyes shining. "This is incredible. I can't believe your parents didn't want to see this." "Their loss," I said quietly. Then the guests started arriving one after another. Engines hummed at the gate. Laughter mingled with children's shouts. Aunt Linda came with her husband and 3 kids, all bearing gifts, as if afraid to come empty-handed. My cousins arrived with their whole families, hugging me with such warmth as if an eternity had passed. My friends from MIT flew in from Boston and immediately started laughing, examining the house as if they couldn't believe I had arranged all this. Former CyberShield employees came from Denver, bringing wine and stories that made everyone roar with laughter. I gave everyone a tour. We went through the main house, the library, which smelled of leather and fresh paper, through the guest house, and then along the paths leading into the property to the stream. People touched the stone walls, ran their hands over the polished wood, as if trying to convince themselves it wasn't a dream. Kids ran around, squealing, rolling on the grass. Laughter filled the air. The house came alive. By noon, everyone had settled in. Some went for short walks on the trails, some warmed themselves by the fireplace with mugs of cocoa, and some watched Marco, who conducted his culinary orchestra like a conductor. At 2 o'clock, I called everyone to the dining room. Two long tables covered with linen tablecloths took up almost the entire room. Light streamed through the windows, reflecting in the glasses. The tables were laden with dishes that would make anyone's head spin. Golden turkey, glazed ham, truffle mashed potatoes, casseroles, sauces, rolls, pies, baskets of bread. This wasn't just a feast, it was a triumph. I stood up holding my glass. "I just want to thank you all for being here," I said, feeling my voice tremble slightly. "It means more to me than you can imagine. I wanted to spend this day with people who truly want to be near me, and I'm happy that you are here." Everyone raised their glasses. Glass clinked, someone shouted a toast. Then Uncle Stephen, awkwardly getting to his feet, raised his hand. "I want to say a toast to Jenny, to the woman who built all this from nothing, and who was kind enough to share it with us." Applause broke out, light laughter. We were about to drink when a sound came from outside, the slam of a car door. Everyone fell silent. I looked out the window. A taxi drove off, leaving a cloud of dust behind. A figure was slowly walking towards the house, not tall, in a long coat. I froze. "Grandma!" I rushed to the door. She stood on the threshold, leaning on a cane, but her eyes were shining. "You thought I'd miss this," she said, hugging me with unexpected strength. "I told your parents I was feeling sick and couldn't go to Ohio. Then I went online, bought a ticket, and flew here myself." She laughed quietly, with a hint of pride, like a child who'd pulled off a mischief. "I figured it all out myself, too." The dinner was perfect, as if the universe itself, tired of the bustle, had decided to quiet down for one evening and let everything be as it should. Around the huge oak table, there wasn't a hint of awkwardness, not a shadow of the usual tension that always hung in the air at family gatherings. No one excused themselves to check on the kids. There were no heavy pauses where someone avoided another's gaze, and no one had to feign joy for politeness' sake. Everyone sat together, truly together. Marco outdid himself. The turkey was juicy and golden, the mashed potatoes were airy, the pies were like from old 1960s magazines, with crusts shiny from egg wash. The aromas mingled into something intoxicating: sage, cinnamon, roasted garlic, butter, a hint of orange zest. People went back for seconds, then thirds, laughing and pretending to scold themselves for gluttony. After dinner, we moved on to the tradition without which Thanksgiving would be just a meal, sharing what we were thankful for. The firelight flickered softly on the walls, wine quietly chimed in the glasses. Aunt Linda said she was thankful for the family. That sticks together no matter what. Uncle James, chin in hand, added that he was thankful for a second chance, at life, at warmth, for not being forgotten. My MIT friends spoke of friendship that had endured years, distance, and all the failures. And then Grandma Margaret spoke. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made everyone fall silent. "I am thankful for people," she said, "who are brave enough to carve their own path when the ordinary roads don't suit them. For people who don't give up, even when those who should support them turn their backs. For people who create something beautiful and share it with others." She looked straight at me. Her gaze was firm but warm, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. I had to turn away, pretend to adjust my napkin, so as not to show how close I was to tears. After dinner, people dispersed throughout the house and grounds. The photographer darted among the guests, clicking his shutter. Group photos, smiles against the mountains, firelight, steam from cups of cocoa. He took both pose shots and candid ones, where someone was laughing, unaware they were being watched. Within an hour, I saw these photos start appearing on social media. My phone vibrated on the table. "Best Thanksgiving at Jenny's estate in Colorado. Who needs Ohio when you have Colorado? Thankful for family that's truly there." The pictures showed the house flooded with light, mountains on the horizon, tables groaning with food, and dozens of smiling faces. It looked like a celebration of life. Later, I went out onto the terrace with Grandma Margaret. The sun was setting behind the mountains, and the sky was turning copper. We sat in armchairs wrapped in blankets and were silent. Only the wind rustled the spruce branches. Suddenly, my phone vibrated again. A message from Madison. "Beautiful house. Didn't know you were so rich. Mom and Dad are in shock." I showed the screen to Grandma. She looked at it and laughed so contagiously she started coughing. "Good," she said, catching her breath. "Let them be shocked. Maybe that will make them think." Late in the evening, when most guests had retired to their rooms or left for the hotel, I stayed in the living room with the closest ones, those who had seen it all, my friends from MIT, a few colleagues, Grandma. The fire crackled quietly in the fireplace. Light played on the wine glasses. That special silence descended, born only among people who know each other deeper than polite conversation requires. "You did great, Jenny," Rachel said, smiling. "It all worked out really well." I nodded, looking at the fire. "Thanks," I replied. "It's just, I wish things were different. I wish they were here." Rachel put down her glass and looked at me for a long moment. "They made their choice," she said quietly, "and you made yours, and your choice was better." At that moment, the phone on the table rang. The name on the screen, Mom. I pressed decline. A minute later, again, then again, and again. It seemed the phone pulsed in time with my heartbeat. Eventually, I switched it to silent mode and left it there, out of sight. The next morning, after a short sleep and a cup of strong coffee, I finally mustered the resolve to answer. "Jenny!" Mom's voice was high, trembling, almost hysterical. "What's going on? Why are there pictures of you in some mansion on Facebook? And why is Grandma with you? We thought she was sick." I took a breath. "She just got tired of your plans, Mom," I replied calmly, "and she decided to come to me." "To you?" Her voice became wary. "In Colorado? What Thanksgiving?" "Mine," I said. "You said you wanted a quiet celebration, just Madison's family. So I invited everyone else, the uninvited ones." Silence fell on the other end, so thick I could almost hear her pressing her hand to her chest. "Who, everyone else?" she finally asked. "Uncle James, Aunt Linda, all the cousins. About 35 people in total. We had a great time." The silence stretched. Then, strained, Mom asked, "Where did you get the money for such a house, Jenny?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I sold my company last year, Mom, for $320 million. Silence again, so dense you could lean your forehead against it. Then a sharp sound, as if Mom, losing control, had slammed the receiver down. In the background, I heard Dad's voice, low, tired, irritated. He was asking what happened, and in response came a shout. Mom's, high, broken, almost hysterical. $320 million? She cried out as if it were a curse. "Why didn't you tell us?" I exhaled. "I did tell you, Mom, last Christmas. You were just too busy with Madison's son to hear me." A noise. Dad had taken the phone. His voice was cold even, with a metallic edge. "Are you trying to prove something, Jenny? Dragging the whole family out to Colorado to show how successful you are?" "No," I replied calmly. "I'm not trying to prove anything. When Mom wrote that I was an unwanted guest, I just made other plans. That's all." "You've made us look bad," he said. "I never forced you to do anything." "You uninvited 23 people," I reminded him, feeling a cold wave rise inside me. "Just because they weren't good enough for Jason's family. So I invited them to my place, all of them, and we had a wonderful time." I heard a woman's voice in the background. Madison. Of course, she was standing right there, as always, the invisible boundary between me and my parents. "Jenny," she said, "do you even realize how this looks? Everyone is posting pictures. Our Thanksgiving looks pitiful compared to yours." "That's not my problem," I replied, almost without thinking. At that moment, there was a soft knock behind me. Grandma Margaret entered the room. She was in a silk robe holding a cup of tea, but her eyes sparkled as if she'd been waiting for this. "Put it on speaker," she said calmly. I pressed the button. "Mom," I heard my father's voice. "Are you there?" "Of course I'm here," Grandma replied. Her voice was firm, ringing like a bell strike. "Where else would I be?" Dead silence on the other end of the line. "You've all taken Jenny for granted for too long," Grandma continued. "Always put her second to Madison. Always. That's why I'm here in Colorado, not in Ohio. We're not jealous," Mom said quietly, and even through the speaker, her voice trembled. "Yes, you are," Grandma cut her off. "And you're ashamed. Ashamed that everyone saw how you treated your own daughter. Jenny didn't do this out of spite. She just wanted to spend the holiday with people who truly love her. That's all. Now you should think about that." Her words sounded not like an accusation, but like a verdict delivered without anger, but with a truth you couldn't turn away from. After that, she silently left the room, leaving me standing with the phone in my hand, on the line, only my father's breathing. "We'll talk later," he said shortly and hung up. The remaining weekend passed like a soft dream. The relatives weren't in a hurry to leave. We walked the morning trails, played board games, watched movies in the home theater, ate leftover pie straight from the pan. Grandma Margaret settled into one of the guest rooms and became the true mistress of the house. People came to her for advice, for stories, for hugs that smelled of lavender, and the confidence that everything would be all right. She sat by the window in an armchair with an embroidered cushion, and even the children listened to her, with mouths agape. On Sunday, the guests began to depart. The house gradually filled with silence. On Monday evening, as the sun was setting, only Grandma and I remained. We sat by the fireplace with cups of tea, listening to the firewood crackle. "You did the right thing," she said suddenly, looking at me over her glasses. I lowered my gaze. "I don't know. Maybe I was just being petty, wanted to sting." "No," she replied. "You were honest, and that's a rarity, and a great difference." She stayed for another week. We went to Denver, visited art galleries, ate in cozy restaurants with tiny vases of snowdrops on the tables, and laughed as if there had been no reproaches, no quarrels, none of those years when we hardly saw each other. It was the longest time I had ever spent with her. Calm, simple, real. When the day of her departure came, I insisted she fly first class. We arrived at the airport early in the morning, and I helped her check in. She hugged me at the gate, tightly, with the strength that only women who have endured much possess. "Make them work for it," she said quietly, almost a whisper, but there was steel in her voice. "Don't let them back in too easily." "I won't," I promised. She nodded and, without looking back, walked towards the gate. A few days later, my phone vibrated. A new message from Madison. "I've always been jealous of you. You chose your own path. You fell and got back up. And I've always been on rails doing what Mom and Dad wanted. I'm sorry that because of me, they didn't pay attention to you. I didn't realize how bad it was." I looked at the screen for a long time. My heart beat steadily, without resentment, without anger, only a warm, slightly bitter silence. Then I typed a reply. "Thank you for saying that." Then the correspondence began. The first to write was my father, briefly, as he always did, without the usual pauses and turns of phrase that used to hide grievances and things left unsaid. He admitted, "Grandma was right. We treated you unfairly, Jenny. We didn't want to see, what you were building and how much strength you had. I'm proud of you," he wrote. I reread those words several times because they sounded unfamiliar, even unreal, as if they came not from my father, but from someone who had only just understood for the first time who I was. An hour later, a message came from Mom, cautious, as if testing whether she was allowed to speak. "Your house looks amazing in the photos. Can we come and see it?" I didn't answer for a long time, for several days, probably scrolling through 100 options, from a cold no to a dry maybe. In the end, when the first snow fell outside and the house was drowned in white silence, I simply wrote, "Come for Christmas, just the three of you, a small group." They replied almost immediately, as if they had been waiting for that invitation all this time. On December 23rd, their taxi pulled up to my house in Colorado. First my father got out, then Mom, followed by Madison. They stood on the driveway, peering at the facade, the panoramic windows, the mountains behind the house, and were silent. The silence lasted like a breath before a confession. Dad looked around, shifted his gaze to me, and finally exhaled, "Jenny, this is incredible." He said it almost in a whisper, as if afraid to break the silence. I gave them a tour of the house, through the halls reflecting the winter sun, the library smelling of oak and paper, the kitchen that still bore traces of the recent celebration. They walked slowly, touching surfaces, as if trying to convince themselves it was all real. In my office, my father stopped in front of the wall where framed magazine covers hung. Forbes, TechCrunch, Business Insider, articles about me, about the company, about the startup that became bigger than myself. His gaze lingered on the Forbes 30 under 30 inscription. "When was this?" he asked quietly. 3 years ago," I replied. He blinked. "You didn't tell us." "I tried," I said. But there was always something more important, news about Madison, her job, her kids. He lowered his eyes, as if noticing for the first time the weight of those years in which I grew up beside them, but always slightly to the side. At dinner, there was a rare silence, not awkward but cautious, as if everyone was afraid to scare away the fragile balance. Mom put down her fork, took a deep breath, and said, "We failed, both of you. We put too much pressure on Madison, demanding perfection, and completely forgot that you have your own path too, yours, no less important. Jenny, forgive us." I saw her fingers tremble, how she averted her eyes, unable to bear her own admission. My father cleared his throat, moved his glass aside. "I think it's time for us to start over," he said. "Try to forget the old grievances, learn to be together again. What do you think? Can we do it?" I looked at them for a long time. Mom looked older than in my memories. Dad had more gray hair, and in Madison's face, always confident, always composed, there was a weariness that hadn't been there before. "We can try," I finally replied. But in my chest lived a doubt. Did they want reconciliation, or were they just looking for a way not to be left out of my success? But the entire time, they never once mentioned money. Not a hint, not a request. Only presence, cautious, uncertain, but real. The days that followed were strangely calm. We walked the snow-covered paths, listened to the ice crunch underfoot. In the evenings, we lit the fireplace, played board games, laughed over little things we hadn't noticed before. In the home theater, we watched old Christmas movies, and I caught myself thinking that for the first time, I wasn't waiting for it all to be over. On Christmas morning, I came down to the living room and saw neatly wrapped presents under the tree. My parents had chosen books, the very ones I had mentioned in passing, good editions with bookmarks and the subtle smell of paper. Mom gave me 2 canvases, paintings by a local Colorado artist she had found herself, mountains, sky, and a narrow trail leading into the distance. "I thought you might like them," she said. Madison handed me a flat, framed package. It was a painting of the Boston skyline, the very panorama I had once photographed from my apartment window. "I remember you said you missed that view," she said quietly, and I realized that all these gifts weren't formal gestures, not substitutes for words, but an attempt to understand, to hear, to connect. At dinner, Mom stood up with a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," she said. To Jenny, who wasn't afraid to carve her own path and invited us to walk it with her. I raised my glass and then felt my father hug me. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not of the house, not the money, of who you've become." 2 days later, they left. The farewell at the door was unexpectedly warm, genuine. I stood on the porch, watching the snowflakes fall on the taxi roof, how the taillights slowly disappeared into the white haze. I didn't know if we would ever become truly close, but for the first time in many years, I didn't feel the cold. We had taken the first step, uneven, belated, but alive. Now I talk to Grandma Margaret twice a week. We laugh, argue, remember. I text with Madison almost every day, without sharp jabs, without competitiveness. My parents call on Sundays just to ask how I am, how the weather is, what's new. It's not a perfect family, not a story of instant forgiveness, but there is more warmth in it than ever before. And for now, that's enough.